Let's turn then to John and chapter 10. Last Sunday, we introduced ourselves to this gospel. We were looking at the key text of the whole book in chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. And if I just read those verses out, you don't need to turn to them. John 20, 30 and 31. Truly, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Now, we have taken three statements, three questions, if you wish, to help unlock this book. And do you remember them? They are the purpose of the book, the person of the book, and the puzzle of the book. Now, those three statements not only unlock the book as a whole, but we can bring those three statements to chapter 10. So turn with me then to chapter 10 of John's Gospel. And what I want us to see is the purpose, the person, and the puzzle that we have in this very well-known, very comforting, very wonderful passage of John's Gospel. So in John 10 and verse 6, we have this verse. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. Now take the word illustration out of verse 6. And it's a very unusual Greek word. It's not parable. It's a word that John uses three times. Once here, we'll see the other two occasions on another time. What we have here then is a wayside proverb, a mysterious saying. And I want us to look at the purpose of this illustration. I want us to see the person of this illustration. And we also need to see the puzzle of this illustration. Sometimes some of you tell me that it's difficult to understand some sermons, that it's difficult to follow what we do sometimes in Bible study, and that sometimes our Bible, the passages we read, are a puzzle. Well, we've got a puzzle today. And if you feel that you don't understand this puzzle, don't be discouraged, because the original audience did not understand this puzzle either. Look again at verse 6 of chapter 10. Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to them. So there's no need to be discouraged today. If we feel this puzzle is a bit beyond us, we'll do our best and we'll see how things go. So I want to say a number of things about this section of John's Gospel before we jump in. First of all that we read here is a direct result of what happens in chapter 9. So turn back a page in your Bibles, and you'll see that in chapter 9, Jesus heals a man who was blind from birth. And it's a very painful read, because this healing miracle takes place on a Sunday, the Sabbath day, the Saturday for the Jews, of course. And that healing miracle causes outrage to the Pharisees. Now, these are the religious police of Jesus' day. And they interview the blind man who has received his sight. They then interview his parents. His parents are terrified of the Pharisees. And the parents abandon this person. They say to the Pharisees, he's old enough, ask him yourself who healed him, because they're so scared of the Pharisees. Now, that's the immediate background for John chapter 10. And if you've got John 10 open in front of you, look at verse 21, and you can see the link there to chapter 9. Others said, "These are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind?" So there's John reminding you that this whole section of chapter 10 flows out of this miracle of healing that you see in chapter 9. I also want you to know that what Jesus says here flows from the Old Testament. And all of you will say, "Well, Neil, of course, this is a reference. The background is to Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd." And if you made that connection, you're right. But it's much more than that. The background to what Jesus says here in the Old Testament includes Psalm 80. It includes Isaiah chapter 40. But more than any other passage, even Psalm 23, the background for this is in the book of Ezekiel. And it's Ezekiel chapter 34. And I'm wondering whether we'll get to look at that on a Sunday morning at some point. It's an amazing passage. It's all about God the shepherd looking and searching for his sheep. So we may do so, but bear in mind then Psalm 23, but more than anything else, Ezekiel chapter 34. It seems to be in the mind of Jesus more than any other passage. So what I want us to do is this. Take a look at the verses 1 down to 21. And I want you to see that we have here 3 sections. Do you see them? And they're quite clear, these sections. First of all, verses 1 through to 6, what Jesus does there is he introduces this illustration. He sets the scene, verses 1 through to 6. And we'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. Then you got the second section. Now that's verses 7 through to 10. And that second section, Jesus says, "I am the door." And he says it twice. You can see it in verse 7, and you can see it again further down. I am the door. That's the second section. And then the third section of this passage is from verse 11, and it's all the way to verse 18. And this section is, "I am the good shepherd." And I guess out of all these verses, these are the ones that are most dear to us and most familiar to us. And Jesus says twice that he is, "I am the good shepherd." That's the third section. And then this little bit ends, verses 19 through to 21, with a division. And it's not the first time there's been a division amongst those who've listened to Jesus. Some say he's mad. Some say he has a demon. Others say, could a demon, could somebody who's mad do the things that he does? We've seen divisions before in John's gospel. And you have another division here. And that division, if you like, rounds off this section of John's gospel. And you may just cast your eyes down to verse 22. Sometime later then, maybe a few months later, we have another conversation about the shepherd being held by Jesus. So do you see the divisions then? 1 to 6, Jesus sets the scene. And what he does in 1 to 6 is he introduces the characters that he's going to use in this illustration. Now, you've got main characters. They'll appear in all 3 sections. But you've also got some supporting characters, if you like, that only appear now and again throughout these 3 sections. So take a look, first of all, then, at the first, verses 1 through to 6. Who's the main characters there? As you look down, what do you see? Well, of course, the character that will occur here and in the other 2 sections is the character of the shepherd. Now, the shepherd, obviously, is the most important, the most significant of all the characters that we will find. Now, as you look at verses 1 through to 5, Jesus doesn't say, "I am the shepherd" here. He just talks about shepherds. He talks about them more generally. Verse 1. I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber, but he who enters by the door is the shepherd. So here's the shepherd then. And Jesus tells us that the shepherd can be recognized as the shepherd because he comes into the sheepfold through the door. You've also got, verse 1, you've got the thieves and the robbers. Here they are in this first section. Obviously, you've got the sheep. They are in all three of these sections, if you like. And then we've also got, haven't we, in this first one, a very odd little fellow, somebody called the doorkeeper. And he only appears here, doesn't he? Look at verse 3. To him, the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. So who have we got? The shepherd, the thieves and the robbers, the sheep and the doorkeeper. There's a mention maybe of a stranger. Is that the same as the thieves and the robbers, do you think? There's your first scene. And it's all very general. And I guess at this point, I should just describe what a sheepfold is. So imagine you're on the hills above Jerusalem, maybe. Imagine you're walking the hills of Galilee, and a sheepfold would be a round enclosure of stone. So it's not surrounded by houses. It's just a round circle of stone with no roof and usually with no door. There's just an entrance, and they would be found on the sides of mountains, perhaps at the top of a hill somewhere, just this circular stone structure. That's what a sheepfold was. So throughout these three sections, Jesus talks about how the sheep are herded into these stone structures. Thieves and robbers will jump over the walls into the flock. There's this opening at the front. In the first one here, we've got a doorkeeper. That's very unusual. You don't get them very often. You don't usually get gates either or doors. You just have an opening. You've got the sheep. You've got strange voices. That's what we have here in the first of these stories. There's your characters. Take a look at the second of them, starting at verse 7. And what do you have here? Well, go down to verse 7. Most assuredly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. Now, I've just explained that you've got a circular stone structure, no roof, so it's open to the heavens, and usually no door. And yet Jesus comes in verse 7, and he says, I am the door of the sheep. And as you go down, verse 8, all who ever came before me are thieves and robbers. So here they are again, the thieves and the robbers that we met in the first section. But the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. Verse 9, he says it again. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. Verse 10. The thief does not come except to steal, to kill, and to destroy. I have come that they may have life, and they may have it more abundantly. There's your second section. Now, just to give you fair warning, when we look at this, we'll do so again in more detail. I want you to think about, what does it mean that Jesus is the door? So just to remind you, mostly, these structures did not have doors. They didn't have gates. They were just open, little space to come through. You've got this odd fellow, the gatekeeper. We need to think about him at some point, I guess. But what does it mean when Jesus says he is the door? I want you to start thinking about that for when we come to this on a Sunday morning. So in the second part, then, you've got the door, the sheep, and the thieves and robbers. Let's turn to the third, from verse 11 onwards. What do we have here? And this one is the most famous, it's the most detailed, it's got the most characters of all these illustrations. It's one illustration really, but in three tellings. So what's in this third telling? Take a look from verse 11. We've got for the first time the Good Shepherd. So we've had shepherds in general. Now we've got the Good Shepherd. And this third telling will talk about the Good Shepherd. And he's contrasted to a hired hand, somebody who's been brought in for the day. Now, I'm going to confess something here. I don't usually watch those programs. Have you seen them? About a year on a Welsh farm that you have, I think it's been about a farm in North Wales. That sort of thing doesn't appeal to me. But I saw 2 minutes of it the other day. And it was showing how they were getting the sheep off the fields and bringing them in for shearing. And they had hired people to help them, the farmers and the owners of the flock. Well, here we've got somebody like that. He's hired for the day to come in. And we are told about him, the hired hand, the hireling, the Good Shepherd, the hired hand. We've got the sheep again. They've been throughout, haven't they? All these tellings. But do you notice a new character? A rather terrifying and awful character in this third telling, verse 12. The hired hand, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming. We have the character of the wolf in the third telling. And this character is hugely significant in this illustration. And we need to see, when we come to it, we need to see that this wolf symbolizes something far greater than the actual illustration that Jesus is using here. So there's the wolf. Verse 13, the hireling or the hired hand flees just because he is a hired hand and he does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, so there it is again. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. So what have we got? The good shepherd, the hired hand, the sheep, the wolf, and then there's one other character. Verse 17, verse 15. Who's this one other that's in this illustration? As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. Well, this other character is the father of the shepherd. And that's something very unexpected. The father of the shepherd is the one who is the owner of the flock. And this father figure takes us all the way back to Abraham and to Jacob and to Jesse, the father of David, who becomes the king shepherd of Israel. This father. And the father has sent the good shepherd out with a purpose. Remember now the purpose of this book? He sends the shepherd out with a purpose. And what Jesus does here, he tells his audience what the father who owns the flock has sent him out to do. What makes him the good shepherd? Well, his father owns the flock, but he also has a specific purpose. He is to go to the flock and he is to do something. So I want just to focus on that for the rest of today. But don't forget now the characters, okay? So this one illustration is a very unusual Greek word, that, you remember that now. It's a complicated thing, it's hard to understand, but it's one illustration and it's told 3 times. It's introduced, verses 1 to 5, and you've got those characters. Do you remember them? You've got the shepherd, the thieves and the robbers, the sheep, the doorkeeper, and so on. That's the first telling. The second telling of this illustration focuses on the door to the sheepfold, with Jesus saying, I am the door. He who comes through me and goes out via me from the sheepfold into the pastures, he it is who has abundant life. He can come in and go out, and you have to imagine the sheep going through the door of the sheepfold, scuttling their way in, and then going out as a flock from the sheepfold onto the field surrounding. You've got Jesus the door. That's the second telling. And then the third telling is this good shepherd. He's contrasted to the hired hand. Still got the sheep, and then you've got the wolf. And what we come to is the great puzzle of this account. Now, the illustration is a puzzle in itself, but the great puzzle is this. This good shepherd has been sent by the Father, the owner of the flock. He has been sent out to the flock with a mission. What's his mission? Well, you see it because he tells you twice. His mission, verse 11, is to die for the sheep. Verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. And then verse 14, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. I am known by my own. Verse 15, as the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So this good shepherd has been sent from the home, up the mountains, into the sheepfold, and he is to die for the sheep. That's the mission, that's the instruction, if you like, that his Father has given to him. Now, here's the puzzle. How is it good for a shepherd to die for the sheep? Surely if the shepherd dies, what's going to happen to the sheep? Look at verse 12. Does not a hired hand, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them? Now, surely if the good shepherd dies, that wolf is going to come into the sheepfold, scattering the sheep. And the imagery of verse 12 is of the wolf and his teeth, sinking his teeth into the sheep, causing the flock to be terrified and panic-stricken, jumping over the walls of the sheepfold, trying to get out. How can a good shepherd die without leaving the flock exposed to the wolf? And of course, as you look at verse 12, what's the difference then between a good shepherd laying down his life for the sheep and the hired hand who runs away from the wolf? The effect is the same. A dead good shepherd and an absent hired hand means that the flock is unprotected. So what's the difference? So here's the puzzle. How is it a good thing for a shepherd to die? But just notice one more thing, if you will. Verse 12. So you've got the hired hand, and he sees the wolf coming. Now, the idea here is this. You need to use your imaginations, and you need to put yourself in the position of the Father, the owner of the flock. So the Father hears that there's a wolf on the loose. He hears that there is a wolf worrying the sheep. So this Father sends out the hired hand to go and keep the sheep safe. The hired hand goes and he sees the wolf coming. And as he sees the wolf coming, this hired hand legs it. And he does that because he doesn't own the sheep. Why should he risk himself for sheep that don't belong to him? So the hired hand runs off into the night, leaving the flock at the mercy of the wolf. So what the Father then does when he hears of this is he sends out his only Son to be the shepherd. And he is to go to the flock, and he has this message, this instruction from the Father. And the instruction is, lay down your life for the sheep. Now, you know what that means, don't you? It means that the Good Shepherd has to directly engage with the wolf. He has to go up into the fields, wait for the wolf. When the wolf comes, he is to engage with the wolf. He's to fight the wolf to protect the sheep. And of course, what we are being told here is this, that the wolf kills the Good Shepherd. When we have this idea of the death of the Good Shepherd, laying down his life, he has come to sacrifice himself for the sake of the sheep at the hands or the teeth or the jaws, the fury of the wolf. And it's the wolf that kills the Good Shepherd. That's what's the thrust of this illustration in verse 6. It's the great puzzle of this illustration, how the Good Shepherd is to lay down his life, be killed by the wolf for the sake of the sheep. But, and you all know it as well as I do, verse 11, I am the Good Shepherd. The shepherd gives his life for the sheep. That's the first statement Jesus says. The shepherd gives his life for the sheep. That's at the opening of this third telling. And then see how Jesus develops it. Verse 15. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. He's told you again. Verse 16, and the sheep I have, which are not of this flock, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice. And there will be one flock and one shepherd. Therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life, and for the first time you get, that I may take it up again. Do you see it there in verse 17? And then developing this, listen to what Jesus says. No one takes my life from me. And that no one includes the wolf. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of myself. It's this act of sacrifice on the part of the Good Shepherd for the sake of his sheep. I lay it down of myself, verse 18, and I have the power to take it up again. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it again. And this command I have received from my Father. So his Father sends him out from the family home to engage with the wolf, lay down his life. So the idea there is that the wolf would come, and the Good Shepherd won't use the rod to beat the wolf away. Do you remember that my rod and my staff? The rod is used to attack animals that would attack the flock. So the rod is used to beat wolves and perhaps even thieves and robbers. And then the staff is used to control the flock itself. The Good Shepherd comes, and he doesn't come with a rod to beat the wolf away. He comes and he submits himself. He sacrifices himself. He lays down his life before the wolf and is killed. But he has the command, he has the authority from his Father to be raised from the dead, to take his life again. Well, here's another puzzle. How can a shepherd lay down his life and expect the flock to be okay. But then how can that shepherd who has been killed by a wolf, how can he bring himself to life again? But that's what we are told here. Verse 18, look at it again. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of myself. And he's having this word power. I have authority, I have the command, I have the power, both to lay it down and to take it up again. And those two things are linked. The laying down of his life is linked to the taking up of his life again. The one follows the other. So the taking up of his life follows from the laying down of it. And as you can see then at the end of verse 18, this command I have received from my Father. It's a puzzle. So the word illustration is a puzzle. A good shepherd laying down his life is a puzzle. But then the greatest puzzle of all is the good shepherd taking his life again and rising from the dead again. And what is he going to do when he's raised himself from the dead? Well, you can see it, can't you? In verse 16. Other sheep I have, which are not of this flock, them I must also bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. He's going to go from this particular flock to which the Father has sent him. He's going to go to other flocks, and they too, like in the first telling, they'll hear his voice and they'll follow him, and he'll bring them all together in one great flock, and he'll be one shepherd and there'll be one flock. So after he takes his life up again, he's going to go to more sheep and bring them into one great flock and be their shepherd. And so just to finish this off, back at verse 18, this command I have received from my Father. This is the authority here. Think of Jacob sending out Joseph to look at his brothers, to see where they are, taking them food, wearing the coat of many colors. Jacob sends out Joseph to the flocks with a command. Here is Jesus saying, the good shepherd has been sent out by God to the flock to lay down his life. Joseph had his life taken from him, do you remember? Or at least so Dad thought, when the brothers took him and threw him into the well. They took the life of Joseph. But here is Jesus laying down his life for the flock. And then, as Jacob found out, the life of Joseph, it came again, didn't it? When he went down to Egypt. But here is Jesus saying, I take my life again. I raise myself because this is the command I have from my Father. Well, what are we going to do? Next Sunday, God willing, all being well, we're going to look at the first telling of this illustration. Chapter 10, verses 1 through to 5. And next Sunday, I want to focus on verse 3. To him, the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice. Let's think about that, because that's a theme throughout all three tellings of this illustration. The sheep hear the voice of the shepherd. They don't hear the voice of the strangers. There's something about that voice that they recognize as authentic and true. They respond to the voice of the true shepherd. Let's think about that. Verse 3. And then next Sunday morning, we'll also do this. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. What does that mean? That this good shepherd knows each sheep by name, and he calls them, and he speaks to them, and he addresses them individually by name, and he leads them out. That's the good shepherd. We'll think about that next week. Verse 4, he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Let's ask God's blessing upon us then.